USB connection.
I know. Did you see mine? I have a fancy ATSU one. If I can unlasso it. Everything in there.
All right, let's get ready to go here.
Uh-oh. I wonder if I can make it stretch. I don't think I can. Cool. Where's my camera?
I may have froze. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
Look how fancy mine is. It has ATSU on it.
Hey, nice.
Isn't that cool?
It is. All right. It looks like the time has blown up on the virtual world. So, hello and welcome to another AT Still University Lunch and Learn session, sponsored by ITS. For those of you who have been with us before, you know that we conduct these sessions using Google Hangouts on air, and we're glad that you were able to figure out how to get to us from either the Google Plus stream or the YouTube stream. Now, I think for ATSU we're pretty good at sharing ideas when we're all together in a classroom or a conference room, but I think we struggle a little bit more to figure out ways of better collaborating and communicating with online tools. And so that's one of the purposes of these Hangouts online. We're continuing to experiment with the format of the Lunch and Learns and to figure out how to build that virtual community and share these ideas online. So if you're participating for the first time, using Hangouts can be really passive. Just sit back and enjoy the session. It's very simple. If you're, like we hope most people kind of are, you want to participate a little bit more and interact with others, then what you can do is go to the chat section and enter your comments there. So we want to see your comments, opinions, even virtual tomatoes. So let us know kind of how things are going and add questions. Okay. I think that's it. If you're really adventurous and you want to be a part of the Hangout, send Jean a note, and she will try and get you an invitation directly into the Hangout, and you can participate from there. So our session today is going to be geared around something that I suspect we all use pretty much every day, and that's calendars. And I'm one of those people who I love calendars. I love the way that things are broken down from years into months into weeks, days, hours, very well structured, very well organized. I love that. I remember the first time that I got one of the Franklin Planner calendar systems. I don't know if they still have those stores. You know, they used to have those stores in the mall, all surrounding this little calendar idea. But I had a summer internship at Chrysler Motors, and so big company, had a chance, they actually paid for the course to take in the Franklin calendar system. And I was amazed at the amount of organization that went around a calendar product. And I was even more amazed that a company would pay for it. I thought, you know, it's just a calendar. So obviously there's a lot more to using a calendar than just penciling a date in a box on a paper calendar. And if we fast forward a couple of decades, now we've got calendars that just run circles around the things that we used to be able to do with a $50 Franklin Planner system. But unfortunately, I'm not sure that enough of us know about how to use these new automated calendar tools as individuals, not to mention how we use these tools within networks like the university. So that's the idea behind today's topic, just to go through some of the many aspects of Google Calendars, highlight some of the things that we can do with them, share some hints and helps, and to help us do that, we have a couple of other people in the chat room or in the Hangout here. So Beth Popri, wave Beth.
Hi everybody.
So Beth, as most of you know, is in Student Affairs at the Arizona campus, and she's a great one to have involved in this. And then we have Melissa Mullick. So Melissa, wave.
Hello.
And Melissa, you're in SHM, correct?
Correct, in Kirksville.
In Kirksville, okay, good. And so then we have our trusty Jean Barnold, who's helping. We're going to start calling her the producer because she kind of does the stuff that's behind the scenes. So Jean, I think we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got quite a few things to go through, and I'm going to share my session here. And Jean, you'll want to put me up on the screen. There we go. So part one, navigation. I think the first thing that we're going to go through is just simple, and I've kind of tried to break things up into 10 parts. The first 3 are pretty basic. Then the second 3 are a little bit more advanced, maybe not quite advanced, but things that maybe everyone doesn't use or doesn't need to know right off the bat. And then the last 3 are a little bit more advanced tips and tools that we can use. So let's take a look at the calendar. If we look at the calendar and think about how it works, really what Google Calendar is it's just a tool to consolidate a lot of different calendars. So I'm going to simplify mine, but you can see we've got several calendars that I have down the left-hand side here. And I'm going to simplify my navigation just to make it easy. If we start in the upper left, you can get to Google Calendar through your Gmail or your ATSU mail through using the black navigation bar that Google provides, and just click on Calendar. Below that we have a search, and you can search your calendar by typing anything in here. We'll talk a little bit more about that toward the end. And then you've got kind of the standard Google information about who you are and your nice little icon here in that top bar. If we go down one level, you can see there's a button for automatically going to today's date. I'm looking at things right now in week view. So if we look over here to the right, we have day, week, month, 3-week agenda options. And I can toggle through those using these 2 carrots, either toggle forward or toggle back. If I want to go directly today, I just click on the Today button. Okay. Down the left-hand side, then what we have is we have what's called the mini calendar. And the mini calendar is just a view quickly of a month at a time, just for the days. Very simple. Again, you can toggle through there. And then we have 2 sections. One section is called My Calendars. So My Calendars, you can see I have many different calendars here. I probably have more than most just because I'm a calendar administrator as well. My Calendars are those calendars that we have edit rights to, or that you have edit rights to. Okay, so if you can change something on a calendar, add events, and make modifications to it, it's under the My Calendar section. In other calendars, same thing. You'll have a whole list of calendars that are under the Other Calendars section. But for other calendars, what we have there is these are ones that you just have viewing rights to. Okay, so you can't make modifications to those calendars. All you can do is just look at those calendars. Okay. All right, so let's go over under the More section then and take a look at some of the other navigation options that we have. So you can print and refresh to update events, and I'll add something here so it doesn't look quite so blank. So there's my work calendar that you guys can see. Okay, and you can see the events that pop up there. And then settings. So settings is another area that's kind of basic to understand. It goes across the top to the left to right with different tabs. The General tab has a variety of things here. General, Calendars, Mobile Setup, and Labs. Look for one more page here. Okay. Mobile setups and labs. If we go from top to bottom, we've got the language, and I'm not going to go through all these. Most of them are fairly self-explanatory. So country. I am going to highlight one here that's the current time zone. So here's hint number 1. If we go back to my calendar, you can see that I actually have 2 time zones shown on my calendar. For ATSU, I keep one on Arizona time and one on Central time. So that's just easy at a glance. I can see the time on both because I can never remember when daylight savings time starts and finishes, so that makes it a little bit easier. Well, you set that here in the settings. So if I go to settings, your current time zone, most of the time you'll have none there, and if you want to add one, then you just click on show additional time zone, and then you can add it there, and then you can put a label on it. Okay, and then you can swap them if you want to have them in a different order. Okay, so that's hint number 1. Other items that are here on the navigation or in the settings, again, pretty much straightforward. One to highlight, I like my weeks to start on Monday rather than Saturdays or Sundays so that the weekends are at the end of the calendar. So that's another neat little one. And then the last one that I'm going to kind of highlight is show weather based on my location. So if you click this, then you'll actually get a calendar to see a little icon that shows you the weather. So that's kind of a nice thing. Okay, so those are the general settings. Calendars, here's a list of calendars, and then you have options for all of the different settings, whether to show it in the list or not. Notifications we'll talk about in a little bit. Sharing we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you can subscribe or unsubscribe to any of these shared calendars. So we'll go through that as well. Most of you probably won't see delete for a lot of calendars. I see them because, again, I'm a calendar administrator for a lot of these. Mobile setup we'll talk about in a little bit, how you can connect your calendar with different mobile tools. And then labs. Labs are things that Google is testing. They call them kind of experimental features. If you're familiar with these in Gmail, there are a lot that are really nice. On calendars, I haven't found a lot of them to be so compelling, but you may. Just take a look at them here. The one that I do want to highlight is one that's called event attachments. So when I create an event, I can add attachments to an event, and that's really handy when everybody gets a notice of an event, and then they've got the attachments to go along with it. So if I've got an agenda or something like that, we can put that as an attachment. Okay, so those are kinds of the basics for navigation. Any questions on that? With the time zone thing, there was a question in the Google Moderator, and you guys keep me honest if I'm forgetting what was in that Google Moderator session. There was a question about how Google handles events that are scheduled over multiple time zones. You'll always see an event scheduled at the time zone that your computer is in. So you need to make sure in that settings section that you have set up your time zone properly, and then you will see it correctly. Okay. So any questions there on the basics of navigation? Okay. I don't see any. You guys jump in if you see any, if you have any comments. So let's go to the second thing.
Brian, I do have a question while you were talking about time zones.
Yeah.
That I think should be addressed. As far as with daylight savings time, let's say daylight savings time starts next Monday, but I need to schedule an appointment for next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Would I put down that it's going to be at 2 o'clock and it'll adjust after the daylight savings time just as if it were, you know, normal, or is that something that we need to look into?
Now, the algorithm should be smart enough to adjust for you. So if it's at 2 o'clock, it'll be at 2 o'clock if it's in daylight savings time, or if it's not in daylight savings time. Whatever the actual time is, that's when the event will get scheduled for. You don't have to adjust mentally for that.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
And Brian, just to interject again, I know when I make scheduling appointments, if I'm going to be in different locations across the country or on the other campus, when I schedule it, it allows me to make my start time Arizona time zone, and then I can change my end time for a meeting to Kirksville time zone if I'm going to be landing there at a different time. I use that quite frequently.
That's a nice one, yeah. But we're going to go through events, and if I forget, highlight that section when we go in and add an event. That's a good one. Yep, good. Okay, so let's go to part 2. Part 2, adding a new calendar. Okay, so now that we know the basics of navigation, the next step is to add a new calendar. So let's say that you've got a use case where you want to have maybe a calendar for your travel days, okay? And there are lots of different ways that you can segment your life into multiple calendars. You might have one, like you can see, I think I have one for menus. So we try to put something for dinner. You know, I know what's for dinner that night or whatever. Let's just take the use case, though, of travel. A couple ways to add a calendar. The easiest one is to go under the My Calendar setting and then create a new calendar. So if I click on that, then again I get the calendar details page. It requires a name of a calendar. The organization, of course, is ATSU, since I'm using my ATSU account. I can put a description of the calendar, either for myself or, depending on what I do in sharing, description for other people to see. Location is something that you can add especially if it's a public calendar. If it's a public calendar, then there are some search criteria that can be used for other people to be able to find, say, a Mesa, Arizona calendar. Again, each calendar has its own time zone, so it doesn't have to be, in the time zone that, that you're in, but you can change the calendar to a different time zone. And then you've got sharing options, and there are really 3 different levels of your ability to share a calendar, or to make it either public or private. The first one is rather obvious, and that's make this calendar public. Okay, so if I'm going to share this calendar, option 1 would be make this calendar public. And within that, then public means public to anyone on the internet. Okay, so we now have multiple public, so we have to define that fairly well. So anyone on the internet would be able to see this calendar. The 2 options that I can then provide are either see all event details. So if I want someone to see the specific information associated with my event, that's what I would use. Or if I just want people to be able to tell, oh, he has something, he's busy, then I would use the see only free or busy, and I hide the details. Okay, so 2 options within option number 1, if you will. Okay. If I don't want it to be public to the world, I just want it to be shared with everyone at ATSU, then I would choose the second option, which is share this calendar with everyone in the organization. Okay. And again, I get those options for either all events or just free and busy details. Okay. AT Still University, remember, for us, is going to include students as well as employees. So ATSU is anyone who's got an ATSU.edu email account. Okay. If I don't want to share this calendar with either of those groups, I can still share it with specific people. And a calendar, in calendar terms, Google kind of uses the terms delegation and sharing interchangeably, but really they're just similar concepts, just different wordage. Okay. So if I share with specific people, let's say I'm a manager and I have an administrative assistant that I want to share with, a lot of times that's called delegation, but it works the same way. I would put the email address of the administrative assistant, and then I would give him options to change a little bit more detail than we had in the public options. You can still either see all event details or see only free busy, but since we're really calling this delegation, I may want to make him an administrator of my calendar, and he can manage changes and sharing. So he could actually share it with an additional administrator if, say, administrator 1 were going to be out of the office and someone else needed to take over that. And then you can not allow sharing changes and just allow changes to events. So you get a few more options at the specific person level. Okay? So those are kind of the basics of adding a calendar. Does that make sense? If you're in the chat room, please just type in, yep, that makes sense. Okay. All right. Anything else, Beth or Melissa, missing there? Okay. So let's go to part 3. Part 3. So this is kind of still the basic category: calendar events and responding to those events. Okay. So to schedule an event, that's probably one of the most common things that we're going to do with a calendar. There are, again, a variety of ways to schedule an event. So the first one is to use the Create button up here at the top. And if I click on that, I can do a quick ad, and it's very good with the example. So it says dinner with Michael, 7 p.m. tomorrow. So let's say I wanted to do something similar. I would say breakfast with Mom at, let's say, 6 a.m. on Friday. And if I click that very quickly, you can see it adds it to my calendar. Okay, so that's option number 1, to create it with the quick create. Option 2 would be to create it by just clicking into the calendar. So if I click in the calendar, and if I click anywhere within the calendar, it's going to choose a default time based on where I click. So when I go into the calendar, it's going to ask me for what the event is. So we'll just do the same thing, breakfast with Mom. And it asks me what calendar I want to associate this event with, so I don't have to necessarily use one that's being shown today. are shown right now. If I wanted to add it to another calendar that I have, and these calendars are just toggled on and off. So if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to check my home calendar, I would just toggle my home calendar on or off, and you can see now the events in red are my home calendar that show up as well. Okay? And again, if I'm adding that event, I'm going to put it on my home calendar instead, and then I'm going to go into event details. Okay? So with event details, when I go into that, I get the option for the date and time, obviously. And here's what Beth was talking about a little bit, is time zone. So I can put a time zone on an event. So if I know that on Saturday I'm going to be in Michigan, where my mom actually is, then what we would do is I would change this to Eastern time, and then it would show up at the right time for me when I get there. And what Beth was talking about is you can actually use different start and end time zones. So for travel, this is very handy. Okay. One other thing to show you here. Okay, so we show where the event is, we show the calendar description. Here's the lab that I mentioned earlier, adding an attachment. You can show yourself as available or busy. So if I add an event that's really just for my own knowledge, I can still say available, so that if someone searches for me, they can see that I'm still available at that time. And then privacy is at both the event level and the calendar level. So I can make an event private even if my calendar is public. Okay, and I would do that here. And there's some nice help text associated with that. If I want to invite other people to this event, so let's say I wanted to invite my mom. In this case, I don't have her listed as mom, so let's say that instead of my mom, I was going to have breakfast with Jean. So I would click Jean, just start typing in her name. It will pop up based on my contact list. I click on her name, and now you can see she will get an automatic invitation to this event when I send it. And I can add others as well. So if I wanted to add Beth, Melissa, I can add them, and it will just list them. Now, what if I'm not sure whether they're available at a particular time or not? Then I can click on this Find a Time tab, and it will bring up the calendars of each of these people who are invited to the meeting. Okay, so with that, I can do a quick, we used to call it busy search, do a quick busy search of who's available at a given time. And if I go ahead a couple of days and look at my work schedule a little bit more, you can see where it starts getting a little bit more populated, and you can see how that would work to find a time. Now, let's say that I wanted to have this meeting in a particular room within ATSU. So what I'm going to do here is click into Rooms, and I'll show you a little bit more about this. And let's say I wanted to have it in the Mustang conference room in Arizona. I just start typing in Mustang, the conference room comes up, Mustang, and I would click Add, and now I can see its schedule as well. So another nice feature if you're trying to schedule meetings. Okay. So those are kind of the simple basics of adding an event. Does that make sense? All right. Jean, Beth, anyone got questions or chat room?
Yeah, I know a lot of times when I'll do events on my calendar, if it's a student event that we're doing, orientation or graduation, I love being able to go into the calendar and do the copy to another calendar function. Because then the event I put on my calendar, I can now just easily replicate that on whatever other public calendars we have out there.
Nice. So let's say the Dean's Council meeting, I'll click on, well, we better go to my calendar here. So I'm going to discard this event. Let's say that I wanted to have breakfast with Mom, and oops, I put it on my work calendar. I really wanted it on my my home calendar. I can go in here and change the option here, or what Beth is referring to is I can duplicate the event here, or I can copy it to a different calendar. So, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not screen sharing, am I? You guys got to keep me honest. All right, there we go. I can go in a couple of places. I can either change the event here on this calendar that will change just this single event, or if I want to put this event on multiple calendars, what Beth was referring to is you can copy it to another calendar under the More actions up at the top. Nice hint. Good. All right. Let's go into part 4, calendar sharing and delegation. And I really have kind of already gone through some of this, but I want to go through one more thing here a little bit. Let me make sure. Okay. Let's take a look. We're going to do part 4 and part 5 kind of at the same time, since I already really went through sharing and delegation. Part 5 is what we call resource calendars. Okay, so with each calendar that's shared, I can add shared calendars to my own listing. So under other calendars here, if I want to click into Browse Interesting Calendars, I can add some calendars that are shared publicly. So here is one that is one of holidays. And I'd suggest that U.S. holidays is probably a good one for people to put on their calendar, just because it saves you the trouble of having to enter all of those. So you can click on it and subscribe to that calendar. If you're a big sports fan, you can do the same thing with different sports. So let's say I want to look at my favorite cricket team. I'm really into the Indian Premier League, and oh yeah, I really like the Kings and the Punjab. Okay, I can subscribe to that calendar. More, it gives us a few more options, but you'll notice that the one that's really interesting for us at ATSU is this resources for ATSU. Okay. Resources, in our case, are those conference rooms. So resources are anything that might, Google uses the term non-human entity. So most calendars are associated with a person. Calendars that are associated with things that are not people, in Google terms, non-human entities. Okay, so a conference room would be a non-human entity. We've put together some shorthand for the different conference rooms that are here. And all of the conference rooms on both campuses, I believe, are listed as resources. So I can actually subscribe to any of these calendars. So let's say that I'm in Missouri and I'm looking for conference rooms. Let's just say the anatomy conference room is right next to my office, and I want to have that on my calendar. I'm going to click subscribe on that, and then it will show up in my calendar listing so that I can toggle that on and off whenever I want to. Okay. There are a couple of other calendars that I should probably point out, and those are some shared academic calendars that we have. So there's one that's, let's just use the KCUM academic calendar as an example. If you want to use the KCUM calendar, what we'll do is we're going to set up some settings so that you can add these anywhere, or that you can add these easily. But the other way to do it is just to go into this option here, Add a Friends Calendar. And let's say that I wanted to add Beth's calendar to mine. I can add a calendar by putting her email address and then clicking Add. If she gives me rights to that calendar, then it will pop up for me as well. Okay. I can also add a calendar by URL. And this is what I was referring to earlier. We'll put the URLs of some of these popular calendars up on a web page, and then people can go ahead and add them by a URL. If you know of someone who has access to a calendar that you would like to have, what you can do is go into a particular calendar settings. And the calendar URL is typically right in this section right here. So you can embed this calendar here, or you can use the calendar address and you can add a calendar based on this address. So all calendars have an address. Does that make sense?
Brian, does that work also for iCals instead of just Google calendars?
Correct. You can see here it gives you the different formats of the calendar. So if I click on XML, it'll give me the instructions for using an XML calendar. iCal, same thing. In this case, it gives me a little warning because it's not a public calendar. All right. One other thing that I do want to show, we were looking at those resource calendars. We've also put together a few pages on the ITS website for each room. So if I go to the ITS website for ATSU, you have to be logged into the portal to get here. It's just its.atsu.edu. And then let's say I wanted to search on that Mustang conference room. So I just go to the search section, I click on Mustang, I'm going to search, and Mustang comes up. This is a quick reference of information about this conference room. So you can see it gives a quick description of the conference room. It says who the contact person for this conference room is. It gives you some information about how many people the conference room will hold and what types of tools are available within it, as well as whether you can eat and drink in there. And then in addition, the calendar is shown for the conference room as well. So I can look at the calendar in month view here. I can switch to week view or agenda view and get a sense of when that particular room might be open. And then if you want to add that calendar to your own calendar, you can use this button down in the bottom right. It's called Calendar. If you click plus here, then it will show up on your calendar as well. And so you see it says, it gives me a little message. Would I like to add this calendar to my calendars? So another nice little feature there that you can easily add a conference room calendar to your own, so you don't have to go back and forth among others. All right, I think that's calendar sharing and non-human entity calendars. All right. Let's look at using reminders. Okay. Going back to my calendar, clean it up here a little bit. Now that I have events on my calendar, I want to use the calendar to make sure that I'm not late. Okay. So I can go into a particular event, and there's a section here that's called reminders. Okay. My default is set up for no reminders, but I can add a reminder for a particular event. And I can add, let's say I want to add 3 or 4 reminders because I'm really forgetful. I can set up a pop-up, an email, or I can have it send me a text message. And we'll, again, go through the text message section in a little bit. So let's say I want to have an email 1 day in advance. Then I want it to email me again, let's say 12 hours in advance. And then I'm going to make sure that it text messages me 10 minutes in advance, and I want to have a pop-up 1 minute before the event. If I miss that event, then I've got some serious issues. Okay, so you can add as many reminders as you want. Some people like to have reminders for every event that comes on their calendar, that shows up on their calendar. You can set that up at the calendar level. So if you go into the calendar settings, there is an option for notifications. And event reminders, this is where you set up the default for any event that's on a calendar. So you can see it says, unless otherwise specified by the individual event. So this would be the default or the overriding notification tool unless you set something up specifically for a particular event. So if you wanted to say always be reminded 15 minutes before a meeting, you would set up a reminder here. Okay. Now, when you receive notifications for events that you've been invited to, you can also get notification. So you can be notified of new events, and you can either set it up for email or text message. When an event changes, so someone has changed a particular event, either changed the room or changed the information associated with it, changed the time, changed the attendee list, you can be notified of that. When events are canceled, you can be notified of that if you desire. You can see that those are the ones that I have set up. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it's just going to change it on your calendar, and you'll never know the difference. So if you don't like to be bothered with stuff like that, you don't have to set up a notification for those types of events. You can even set up a daily agenda where it will email you your daily events at 5 a.m. in your current time zone. Okay. Let's go quick into mobile, and I'll show you the SMS details. So I'm going to go back to my calendar. That's okay. I'm going to go into settings, and we had that mobile setup. So if I want to set up text messages, this status right here is the area that you would do it. I already have mine enabled, so you can't see it. But I think what it would say is it would tell you to enter this phone number, and then you have to go through some kind of a verification process. It's a one-time setup, and it's not very difficult. So you can set it up there. And then it will show up with the SMS options if you don't see those. Okay. Any questions on notifications? All right, good. Okay, good. So thanks, Gene. Also, Gene, if you would, put in the chat the number of online viewers that we have. That would be helpful, too. Okay, so let's go to the next section. Part 6, reminders. Part 7. So now we're starting to get into things that are a little bit less familiar. So these are, I would call them a little bit more advanced topics. Okay, so let's talk about tasks on your calendar. Let me go back to my calendar. Every calendar, every Google Calendar option has a calendar that's called tasks. So if you scroll down in your My Calendar list, you'll see a calendar that's called tasks. Tasks works a little bit differently than any of the other calendars. And you can tell that when you click on the down arrow, you can see that you only have the option to display and choose a color, as opposed to some of the other calendars. If I click on one of these, you can see that I get all of the settings options. So tasks works a little bit differently. Again, I'm going to toggle it on. I actually use tasks quite a bit. Tasks are just like they sound. They're items that are things that you have to do. That's how most people use it. And they show up in two places. They either show up here in the all day section. So these are events that are associated with a particular day but not a particular time. And then there's also a section on the far right that you can toggle on and off with this little arrow right here. So I can do that. And then you can see how behind I am on my tasks, since these are tasks from August 7th. And then I've got lots. Okay. So to add a task, pretty much just like an event, I can click into a section up here for a particular day, and it gives me an option to either add an event or I can click on task. So if I click a task, I'm just going to add a test task for August 21st. I can put some more information about a particular task, and then it's just simply create the task. Now that's one that's associated with a particular day. If I click on that task and I go into the details, I can change the date if I want to, or I don't have to make it have a date. So maybe this is just a running list for myself of things that I would like to do someday maybe. Okay, I can do that as well. You can have multiple lists of events. Mine's not showing up here, but you can have, say, work events, home events, those kinds of things. And you can move a task just like you can an event to a different calendar. You can move a task to a different list. And then also on the right-hand section, if you go down to the very bottom, there are options here. The plus sign will add a task. The trash can will delete a task. You can switch into multiple lists. So here you can see I have multiple lists. And then you also have actions for how you sort the tasks in this list. And you can move a particular task up and down in the list. Okay, so tasks are kind of are pretty useful. Yeah, go ahead.
Brian, Melissa has a a question on that.
I use the tasks, but I guess we're wondering if the tasks can have reminders attached to them, or if that's just something that you have to visually see on your calendar.
Yeah, I wish. They don't. The other thing that I get frustrated with is I would really like to be able to drag a task into my calendar and make it an event, but I can't do that yet either. So tasks is a section that I don't think Google has put much emphasis on, but there are a lot of third-party vendors that will use Google Tasks. So that's what I do. I use a third-party vendor and use my tasks that way really more than I do on this calendar. So they'll sync up, and then I see them on either my smartphone or iPad or something like that.
Yeah, I know with what we do, a lot of times I'll put some events that I need to make sure to do this on this specific day as an event, even though it's not really an event, it's more like a task, just so I remember that day to get that reminder. So I just kind of wondered if there was a reminder for a task or not.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I haven't seen that one out there, so you may actually submit that one. That's one that I haven't heard. That's good. All right. Let's look at the next one then. We've got part 8. So going mobile. Okay, mobile is definitely a nice tool to be able to look at your calendar on your smartphone device or your iPad device. This is one that has not really been as easy as it should be to set up, and it depends on what kind of device you have. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because it's so dependent on what device you have, but I will show you where you set this up. So again, we're going to go back to the calendar, and we're going to go into settings, and we're going to go into mobile setup. And if you look, there's a little highlighted box here that talks about syncing your Google Calendar with your mobile phone or your tablet. This is where the instructions are about how to set it up with your particular device. So if I click on this Learn More option, you can see that it gives me options to set up what's called CalDAV. Really, this is for iOS devices, so an iPhone, an iPad, an iPod Touch would use this. And I believe the instructions today are the same for the iPhone and the iPad in CalDAV. In the past, they have not been, so it's been a lot more confusing in the past than it is now. With an Android device, if you have an Android phone, if I click in there, you'll have to know what version of Android you're on, and then there are separate instructions depending on what version you have. And then I think it also has an option for Windows Mobile. And these directions are pretty good. If you have trouble with any of these, let the help desk know. They're pretty good at helping people set up their calendars on their mobile devices. One thing I will point out is a lot of people have iPhones, and if you click down, one thing that's really nice is to be able to sync multiple calendars on your iPhone device. Here's the little URL. This to me is a tip worth gold. If you go to this URL, it just brings up a very simple page, and that page will show which calendars you have, and then this is the selection criteria for what calendars get synced to your phone. So that's really nice.
Brian, we have a question from Jane Johnson. Can you sync tasks to your mobile device?
Yeah, you can, but only with a third-party product. So I don't think there's any Google Task app that you could use. And I'm not sure that there's even a web page. So I'm not sure that you can even go to tasks in a web page and sync your tasks to your phone. So you'd have to use a third-party app for that. So no, sorry, Jane. Okay. Anything else on mobile that I'm missing here? Okay.
Brian, are iPads the same approach as the iPhones for syncing your calendars?
Yep, exactly the same. Yep. All the iOS devices work pretty much identically when it comes to the Google tools. Okay, let's go into the next section here. Google Sites. Okay, so now we're really getting into some more advanced topics. So we talked a little bit about, and I showed you the example of the Google site that we had where we had embedded calendars for each room. That's relatively easy to do. Again, to get to Google Sites, you can just click on your Google navigation bar and go into Sites. And if I go into my sites, I have one that I just use for testing. It's really ugly. And let's look at calendar testing. Okay. I can embed a single calendar, or multiple calendars like I've done here relatively easily. So I'll just show you how to do that quick. I'm going to go in and edit this page. And let's scroll all the way to the bottom. And let's say that I'm just going to insert. I'm going to insert a new calendar. So it's very simple, obviously menu-driven, insert calendar. It takes a look at my calendars, and I can select which one calendar or multiple calendars. I guess it's just one at this point. Calendars that I would like to add. Okay, so that's how I add a simple single calendar. Okay, that's the simplest version. If I wanted to add multiple calendars, what I can do is I can go back to the calendar, and on any particular calendar, if I go into the settings, there's the embed this calendar section. And let's say that I want to go into customize a calendar. Here what it's going to do is it's going to give me the code that I have to include to embed a calendar on my website. It sounds a lot more programming oriented than it really is. It's not that tough. And what I can do here is here's where I get the option to display multiple calendars. So if I wanted to put these 3 calendars, then it automatically changes that code for me. Okay. And then you get some other options, how big you want the calendar to be, what week you want it to start on, the colors, whatnot. So you get some other options there. Okay, so that's a little bit about integrating calendars with websites. I'm going to show you one more thing, and this one really is more by example. That it's nice to do with calendars. Cancel out of here. You can actually embed multiple calendars and include this drop-down arrow. So if I click this drop-down arrow, now I'm only seeing a handful of the calendars that I have access to, and I can toggle just within those calendars. So you can see this would be very useful for, like I have so many different calendars. Several of them are related to home type issues. Well, rather than going in and toggling in 10 different calendars for all of my home issues, I would rather go somewhere like here, see all of them, and just be able to toggle the individual calendars rather than looking at the entire list. Okay, does that make sense? Same thing for work. If I wanted to just have a website where I could maybe look at those employees that I supervise, I could have 4 or 5 calendars of just the people that I supervise in a calendar and then toggle them on or off. This is not quite as straightforward, but again, it's not rocket science. I think what we'll probably do at some point, if there's interest, is put together some instructions on this. And I'll give you a website to go to if I can remember it. But it's not coming to me right now. There is some documentation of how to do this out there, and what I'll do is I'll put this in the chat section so you can see it after the event, after the session. Okay. So that's going mobile. Integration with Google Calendars. Let's talk briefly then about what other things we can expect Google to do with calendars moving forward. I think there are a couple of things on the horizon. If I look at my calendar here, you can see that this Lunch and Learn has a little icon associated with it. That's because this event actually came from Google+. And I think what we'll see is we'll see more integration from tools like Google+ to the calendar. And rather than going into the details of the calendar, when I click on this event, what it will do is it will actually go to the event page in my Google+. I think we'll see more things like that, where let's say that I've scheduled a hangout for all of my reports, which we do fairly regularly. I think what I'll be able to do eventually is just click on my calendar and it will open up the hangout and I'll be right there. So it'll make it a lot easier for me to get into a hangout as a meeting type. So that's one thing that I think will happen. Another thing that I'm fairly sure that we'll see probably sooner rather than later is something called universal search. So I'm going to click into my mail here quickly. And let's say that I'm doing a search in my mail for things like lunch and learns. Sorry, hit the wrong button. And if I search on my mail, it will not only bring up my mail with this topic associated with it, it will also bring up documents and sites that I have lunch and learn in it. So it becomes a way to search all of the information that I have stored in Google with one, what we call universal search. I would expect that docs and sites and calendars will be here relatively soon, I would say within a matter of months. So those are some other things that I think we can see going forward. I talked a little bit about third-party apps. Google is opening up what they call their APIs to some of this, and I think we'll see a lot more with Google Apps as well. So I know it's kind of a quick tour. I think we've gone through a lot of stuff. Is there anything else that we've missed or other questions that people have about Google Calendars? Did everybody at least take away something? Show in the chat. Did you at least got one hint out of the session? Go ahead, Beth. Did you have something?
I mean, I know for us, I mean, we really encourage student groups, student interest groups, you know, and clubs. When they do events, we try to get all of them to get a Google Calendar for their programs because it's just so easy to share. We constantly are talking about where's the university calendar for events, and these are just perfect because you can just add and share and click through them and see different events, and it's really helpful.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think if we can use some of the tools like I was showing where you can select different events, then I think that will even be better so that you can kind of segment different topics. You can put them up that way. All right, I see Jean put a note. There's nothing from the chat room. So I think with that, we'll sign her off. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.